What if Texas decided enough was enough? The Lone Star State, once its own republic in the 1800s, breaks away from the United States and declares itself an independent country again. No longer just the second largest state in the US, Texas would now be one of the most talked about nations on the planet. But could it work? Could Texas actually function as its own country? Would it be a thriving oil-powered nation? Or a political and economic disaster? And how would the rest of the world react? Texas is unlike any other US state. It's huge, resource-rich, economically powerful, and culturally distinct. If Texas were a country, it would rank around 9th or 10th in global GDP, ahead of Canada and South Korea. It produces more oil than most countries and is a global energy hub. It has a population of nearly 30 million, larger than Australia. It has its own electric grid, constitution, and even a nationalist movement, the Texas Nationalist Movement. And most importantly, Texas was once an independent nation from 1836 to 1845. This historic precedent gives secessionist dreams a sense of legitimacy not found elsewhere. Let's get one thing straight: no US state can legally secede under current constitutional law. The Supreme Court ruled on this in Texas versus White, 1869, declaring that secession is unconstitutional unless agreed upon by all states or through revolution. However, that hasn't stopped people from trying. The Texas Nationalist Movement has thousands of supporters and consistently lobbies for a referendum. So for this scenario, we're imagining a situation where a referendum does happen, and for political reasons, the federal government lets it go, either to avoid civil conflict or because of overwhelming political pressure. Think Brexit, but with cowboy hats. If Texas left the US, its $2.4 trillion economy would instantly make it one of the top 10 economies in the world. It would be a petro-state, heavily reliant on oil, natural gas, and renewable energy. But it also has major strengths in technology, aerospace, and agriculture. But independence also means taking on new burdens: border security, international trade deals, currency creation and inflation control, and loss of US federal funding, Medicare, Social Security, military bases. While Texas could survive economically, the transition would be bumpy and possibly chaotic. For the rest of the United States, losing Texas would be a massive blow: GDP loss, national security implications, loss of key bases, and energy disruptions. The psychological impact of a US breakup would be enormous. Texas now shares a foreign border with the US. Would people need passports? What happens to dual citizens? The US would likely erect border infrastructure. Texans would need new passports. Cross-border families and workers would face a bureaucratic nightmare. Who becomes a Texan citizen? Do US residents in Texas lose their American citizenship? Would immigrants in Texas now be considered undocumented? These questions would take years of negotiation and cause massive confusion. Texas hosts several major US military bases. If Texas became independent, the US would almost certainly pull out. Texas would need to build a military from scratch, establish foreign alliances, possibly with NATO or Mexico, and develop its own intelligence and cyber capabilities. This would cost billions and leave Texas vulnerable during the transition. Would hostile nations exploit the power vacuum? Could cartels increase their influence in border regions? Would international powers try to sway the new Texan government? What would you do if Texas became its own country? Would you move there? Would you leave? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's debate. Who leads the new Republic of Texas? Would it be the governor? A newly elected president? Texas politics are heavily Republican and libertarian. A newly independent Texas might lean into minimal government, gun rights, and deregulation. But could this lead to internal divisions? What about left-leaning areas like Austin or parts of Houston? Secession might open the door to further fragmentation within Texas itself. Would other nations recognize Texas? Likely yes. If the process is peaceful, countries like the UK, Canada, and EU members would recognize the new state to maintain economic and diplomatic ties. But if the secession is messy or violent, recognition might be delayed. Texas would also need to join the UN, build embassies, and create trade agreements. It could align with oil-producing nations, OPEC, or NAFTA partners, Mexico, Canada. Texas would need its own currency, or would it? Options include creating a new currency, Tex coin, using the US dollar informally, like Panama does, or pegging to gold or a cryptocurrency. Establishing a central bank, controlling inflation, and gaining investor trust would be critical. Texas would no longer receive federal funds for Medicare, Social Security, federal student loans, or federal disaster relief. It would need to create entirely new agencies for taxation, healthcare, education, and social services. This would likely lead to short-term instability and long-term restructuring. Texas secession might spark a domino effect. Movements in California, Calexit, Florida, and Alaska might gain momentum. The US could enter a new era of fragmentation, like the Soviet Union or Yugoslavia. Or it could trigger a national movement to reaffirm unity and strengthen federal control. Texas has the size, economy, culture, and identity to function as a country. But the challenges of modern governance, international diplomacy, and economic transition are monumental. Would independence be worth it? Or is Texas better off as a powerful, proud US state? Beyond the obvious structural shifts, independence would also spark cultural change. Texas might try to position itself as a cultural powerhouse, emphasizing its unique identity with a revived national anthem, redesigned currency, and updated national holidays. It could market itself as a libertarian utopia or a high-tech republic, depending on leadership. But cultural nationalism might also fuel internal conflict, especially among ethnic minorities and migrants who identify as American. Debates over education policy, social issues, and language laws could grow more intense. Would Texas adopt English-only policies? How would it treat undocumented immigrants or people born outside its borders? Religious influence may also increase in Texas policy, depending on who governs. Faith-based education, reproductive laws, and church-state separation might be redefined in ways that spark international attention. International corporations with headquarters in Texas would have decisions to make. Do they stay in an independent state with new trade rules and regulatory systems, or relocate back to the US? Companies like Dell, ExxonMobil, and AT&T could become key power brokers in shaping Texan policy. Meanwhile, other global powers like China and Russia would likely monitor the secession closely. Could they exploit the weakened US for influence? Would they offer economic incentives to Texas to gain a foothold in North America? Or would they stay cautious to avoid provoking Washington? Even pop culture would be affected. How would Hollywood portray a newly independent Texas? Would country music become a soft power tool? Would Texas sport teams continue in American leagues, or create their own? It sounds small, but identity is built in the culture we consume, and Texas would have to rebuild that from scratch. What do you think? Should Texas become a country again? Or is that a dangerous fantasy? Let us know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, like, share, and subscribe for more What If Geopolitics. Thanks for watching.